The small town of Northfield was the kind of place where the roads were always quiet and the air smelled faintly of pine trees. There were no bright lights, no hustle and bustle, just the occasional chirp of crickets and the rustling of leaves. Emily, a 16-year-old high school student, found solace in this isolation. Her parents, both hard-working individuals, rarely had time for her. Her father, a construction worker, worked late shifts, while her mother, a nurse, was often on call during the night. As a result, Emily spent most evenings by herself in their modest two-story house. For the first few months, Emily relished the solitude. She was able to watch TV, read books, and enjoy the peace that came with being alone. But as time passed, a feeling began to creep into her, an uneasiness that wasn't easy to define. It was as if she was being watched, as if someone was always standing just out of sight. The thought seemed ridiculous at first, but the more she felt it, the more the sensation became an undeniable part of her nightly routine. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the darkness began to creep in, Emily found herself curled up on the living room rug, wrapped in her favorite gray hoodie and striped pajama pants. She was watching reruns of her favorite show, trying to pass the time until her parents came home. The phone rang. The sound was jarring, louder than usual, and its suddenness startled her. It was the landline, the one that rarely ever rang. She glanced at the clock, 7:30 p.m. Just after dusk, when the world outside her window felt eerily still. She picked up the receiver, expecting it to be one of her friends playing a prank. But what she heard wasn't a familiar voice. Instead, a deep, cold voice asked, "Are you home alone?" At first, she thought it was just a coincidence, maybe a wrong number, or a friend trying to spook her. But then the voice spoke again, this time with an unnerving familiarity. "I can see what you're wearing," it said. The gray hoodie and red striped pants. Emily's stomach dropped. How could this person know what she was wearing? She had never told anyone. She tried to laugh it off, thinking it was a prank, but the voice on the other end of the line only grew more specific, describing her actions, the way she was sitting on the rug. It wasn't possible. No one should have known these things. Panic began to set in. She slammed the phone down, but the sense of dread clung to her like a shadow. The caller's words replayed in her mind over and over, each one cutting deeper than the last. For the next few days, the calls continued. Every night, at the same time, the phone would ring. Each time, the voice would be more specific. It would describe her outfit, her position in the room, and even the small details of her environment, the book she was reading, the drink she had left on the table. It became clear to Emily that the person on the other end of the line knew more about her than anyone should. She tried to tell her parents, but they didn't take her seriously. Her mother chalked it up to a prank, and her father suggested that she just ignore the calls. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The idea of someone watching her, tracking her every move, filled her with dread. She couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, and the once peaceful house now felt like a prison. The worst part was that the calls never came from the same number. No matter how many times she checked, there was no record of the number in her call history. It was as if the calls were coming from nowhere, a voice that appeared without warning, then disappeared just as quickly. One night, as Emily sat at the kitchen table, doing her homework by the soft glow of a single lamp, the power in the house suddenly went out. The lights flickered once, then plunged the house into complete darkness. Emily sat frozen, waiting for the lights to come back on, but they never did. The silence that followed was suffocating. She fumbled around for a flashlight, her hands shaking, but before she could find it, she heard something that made her blood run cold, a tapping on the back window. Slow, deliberate, and almost rhythmic, as if someone was trying to get her attention. The sound wasn't random, it was methodical, like someone was trying to communicate with her. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she moved toward the window, not daring to look out. Instead, she backed away slowly, feeling the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. That's when she heard the phone ring again. This time, Emily didn't pick it up. She couldn't. But as the phone rang, she could almost hear the voice in her mind, "I told you I would come back." The words echoed through her head, sending a wave of terror over her. She locked herself in her room, not daring to turn on the lights. The house felt alive with a presence she couldn't explain. The tapping continued, and the phone kept ringing. The next day, the power was restored, and the world outside seemed to return to normal. But inside, Emily felt like she was losing her grip on reality. Her once peaceful home was now a place of terror, and the voice on the phone seemed to be following her, lurking in every corner of her mind. She couldn't escape the fear, no matter where she went. She tried to tell her parents again, but this time, they grew frustrated with her. "It's just a prank," her mother said, dismissively. "You're overreacting." Emily felt utterly alone. She stopped going to school, stopped seeing friends. Her once vibrant life shrank to a small, dark room where she spent her nights listening for the phone to ring. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always watching her, always waiting for her to slip up. The calls continued, but they were no longer just about Emily. The voice on the other end began to speak to her in cryptic, unsettling terms. "I'm closer than you think," it would say. "You can't hide from me forever." Emily's mental state began to deteriorate. She became paranoid, afraid to leave her room, afraid to leave the house. She started locking the doors, checking the windows, and even setting up cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of her stalker. But every time she checked, there was nothing. One night, when she couldn't take the fear anymore, she unplugged the phone, locked it in the basement, and waited for the nightmare to end. But the next day, the phone was back in its place, plugged in and ready to ring. Emily's last-ditch effort to escape came after one final call. She was in her room, trembling with fear, when the phone rang one last time. "You can't run from me," the voice said. "I will always find you." That was it. Emily couldn't take it any longer. She packed up what little she had left, called her parents, and told them she was leaving. She couldn't stay in that house any longer. But as she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the voice was still following her, that the shadow of her tormentor was still lurking in the corners of her mind. Emily moved to a new town, away from the house that had been her prison. She tried to start fresh, to build a new life, but the fear never left her. The voice still echoed in her mind, and the memory of the phone calls haunted her every waking moment. She found a new house, a new routine, and tried to convince herself that she was safe. But even in the quiet of her new home, she could still feel the presence of the one who had tormented her. And one night, years later, she returned to the house. The place was abandoned, empty, falling apart. As she stood in the doorway, the phone rang one last time. She didn't pick it up. The voice on the other end of the line was the same as ever. "I told you I'd come back." The story ends ambiguously, leaving the mystery of the caller unsolved. Was it a ghost? A stalker? Or something more supernatural? The questions linger in Emily's mind as she moves forward with her life. No matter where she goes, the fear of the unknown will always follow her. Emily's life after moving to the new town should have been a fresh start. She found a modest apartment in a quieter part of the city, away from the wooded isolation of her childhood home. The surroundings were different: busy streets, crowded parks, and new faces. But despite the change of scenery, Emily could never shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every time she entered her apartment, she found herself double-checking the locks, pulling the blinds down even when there was no one in sight. The first few weeks were a blur. She tried to establish a routine, finding solace in the mundane tasks of daily life: grocery shopping, laundry, walking through the local park. But the more she tried to ignore the past, the more it seemed to come crashing back into her thoughts. Every ringing phone reminded her of the nights spent listening to that chilling voice. Every shadow in her apartment felt like the prelude to something sinister. She began to question herself. Was she just paranoid? Or was there something real, something darker that had been haunting her, perhaps before she even realized it? She tried to talk to a therapist, someone who could help her cope with the trauma, but every session seemed to only bring up more questions she couldn't answer. Chapter 11, The Return of the Voice. One evening, just as Emily was preparing dinner, she heard the unmistakable sound of her landline ringing. Her heart skipped a beat, and before she could even think, she rushed to pick it up. But before she could reach the phone, it stopped ringing. Was that it? She thought. She grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter and called the landline, but no one picked up. The call, however, had triggered something deep within her, a ripple in her mind that stirred something dark. She hadn't thought about the phone calls in months, but now, that familiar feeling of dread came rushing back. That night, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, as memories of her previous home flooded her thoughts. The sound of the tapping at her back window, the voice on the phone that seemed to know her every move, it all came rushing back like a wave crashing over her. As she lay in bed, she tried to calm herself with deep breaths, telling herself that she was safe now. She wasn't in the old house. She wasn't surrounded by the looming darkness of the past. But just as she started to drift into a restless sleep, the phone rang again. The calls came almost nightly. Emily had become so conditioned to the sound of the phone ringing that it had become the soundtrack to her fear. She had changed the number on the landline, disconnected the line entirely, and even bought a new phone. But still, there it was, the ringing. She had blocked all unknown numbers on her cell, but every time the phone rang, Emily's pulse would quicken, and her fingers would tremble as she reached for the receiver. She never answered, of course. She knew better by now. The voice never needed an introduction, and the words were always the same: "I'm closer than you think." Or, "You can't hide forever." At times, the calls would stop for days, even weeks. She would dare to relax, to hope that maybe the nightmare had finally ended. But just as soon as she allowed herself that small comfort, the phone would ring again, breaking the silence of her home like a sickening snap of a twig in the forest. But this time, something was different. The voice was not just speaking about her clothing, her actions, or her immediate surroundings. It was speaking about her thoughts, her deepest, most private thoughts. "You can't escape your past, Emily," the voice whispered one night. "You're still mine." Emily became a shell of her former self. She stopped going to work, stopped socializing. Friends, what few she had left, called her, but she could never bring herself to answer. The sound of their voices seemed like an intrusion, like another layer of the facade she had built around herself. They didn't understand. No one could. How could they understand what it felt like to have your life controlled by someone who wasn't even physically there? Her life became a monotonous cycle of waking, checking the locks, and sitting in the darkness. She started keeping a journal, writing down every thought, every fear, in the hopes that it would help her make sense of everything. The more she wrote, the more she started to question herself. Was the voice truly real, or was it all in her head? Maybe she was losing her grip on reality, slipping further into paranoia. The fear of it all was beginning to overwhelm her, but there was no escaping it. She had to face it, had to understand what was happening to her. One day, while scrolling through an online forum dedicated to strange occurrences, Emily stumbled upon a story that seemed eerily familiar. The post described a similar experience: someone who had been tormented by strange phone calls, someone whose life had been invaded by a shadowy figure through technology. The poster claimed that the torment ended when they confronted their fears head-on, when they found the courage to acknowledge that what was happening wasn't something they could escape, but something they had to face. Emily felt a flicker of hope. Could this be the answer? Could facing her fear actually end it? For days, Emily pondered the idea. She knew she couldn't live like this anymore. She had to do something. But what could she possibly do to confront something that wasn't even human? Emily decided to return to her old home, the one where everything had started. She had to face it, confront whatever it was that had haunted her so relentlessly. The house had been abandoned for months, left to rot in the wilderness. It was a ruin now, boarded up windows, the door hanging loosely on its hinges. As she stepped onto the porch, memories rushed back, and the air felt thick, heavy with dread. She took a deep breath and entered the house. The silence was deafening. Everything was the same as she had left it, except now it felt wrong. The walls seemed to close in around her, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker than ever. Emily made her way to the phone, which sat on the small table in the living room. It was there, waiting for her. The phone that had started it all. She picked it up, her hand shaking, and waited. The line remained silent. Then, she heard it. The voice, faint at first, but growing clearer. "I'm here, Emily. I told you I'd come back." But this time, Emily wasn't afraid. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't hiding in a corner. She stood tall, staring at the phone. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Why have you been tormenting me?" The voice on the other end chuckled, a deep, unsettling sound. "I am what you fear most. The one you can never escape. The one who has always been there, lurking in the shadows." And then, the line went dead. It was only after the line went silent that Emily realized something crucial. The voice wasn't just an external presence. It was a manifestation of her own fear, her own past. She had been running from something inside herself, something that had taken root during her childhood, something that had grown with her over the years. The phone calls, the shadow, the fear, it had all been a reflection of her own unresolved trauma, her inability to face her deepest insecurities. For the first time, Emily understood. She had to stop running. She had to face her past, her fears, and let them go. She wasn't going to let the past control her anymore. Emily left the house that day, knowing that she would never be the same. She had confronted her fear and survived it. The phone calls never came again. She went back to her life, slowly rebuilding, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. But even now, whenever she hears a phone ring in the distance, her heart skips a beat. She's not sure if she'll ever fully be free of the echoes of those calls, but she knows one thing for certain: she can face whatever comes next. Alton, Ohio, is a place that seems frozen in time, a small town hidden away from the hustle and bustle of the world. I had always known it as a quiet, peaceful town, small enough that everyone knew each other, and the streets were often empty except for the occasional car passing by. It was the kind of town where the sound of crickets filled the air at night, and the evenings were calm and still. But it wasn't the town that had been bothering me. It was the house. My grandmother's house was a place of nostalgia for me. I had spent countless summers there as a child, running through the overgrown yard, climbing trees, and exploring the various rooms of the old house. Back then, it had felt like an adventure, full of secrets and hidden corners. But now, standing in front of it as an adult, it seemed different, darker, older, and more imposing than I remembered. It had been a while since I last stayed in the house on my own, and I wasn't sure what to expect. My parents had gone out of town to visit some relatives, and my grandmother had gone away for a few weeks. I decided to take this opportunity to spend some time in the house, thinking it would be comforting, a way to reconnect with my childhood. But as I stepped inside, a wave of unease washed over me. The house smelled musty, the walls felt closer than I remembered, and the silence seemed almost suffocating. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and I could feel the weight of every step I took. The first night, I tried to distract myself. I made myself a cup of tea and settled into the living room, curling up on the couch in front of the TV. It was an old television, bulky with the crackling static that came with its age. The light from the screen flickered in the dim room, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor. But then, I heard a faint sound, like something moving. I looked up, expecting to see a draft or something simple, but then I heard it again, a creaking, like a door slowly opening. My heart skipped a beat. The sound came from the hallway. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. Was it just the house settling? Was it the wind pushing against the door? I walked cautiously to the hallway, but when I opened the door, there was no one there. The hallway was empty, the room silent. I let out a slow breath, trying to calm myself, but something didn't feel right. The door to the study, which had always been slightly ajar, was now wide open. I stared at it, the dim light from the living room casting strange shadows on the floor. The door hadn't been opened before. I was sure of it. When I returned to the living room, I noticed something else. The rocking chair in the corner, the one my grandmother always sat in, was turned the opposite way. It was facing me, as if someone had been sitting there, watching me. The days passed slowly, but the feeling of unease never left me. Every night, I would sit in the living room, trying to enjoy my time there, but each time I would look over at the rocking chair, I would notice it again. The creaking. The slow rocking. It wasn't loud, but it was constant. Each night, it seemed to rock more back and forth, as if something invisible was sitting in it. I tried to convince myself it was just a draft or the house settling, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. The first time it happened, I tried to ignore it, but as it continued, I couldn't dismiss it any longer. It felt like the chair was alive, moving on its own, waiting for something or someone. The strange thing was, every time I walked into the room, it would stop. But when I left, it would start up again. One evening, I decided to approach the chair. I slowly walked across the room, my heart pounding in my chest. As I neared it, I stopped. The rocking stopped too. I sat down on the couch, too scared to get any closer. I had to remind myself that there was no one there. No one but me. I thought perhaps I was imagining things. So, to take my mind off the strange occurrences, I decided to go down to the basement to check on the plumbing. My grandmother had always been concerned about a leak she thought was coming from one of the pipes, and I figured I might as well take care of it myself. The basement was a dark, damp place. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, and the concrete wall seemed to close in on me. I flicked on the light, but it buzzed and flickered, casting eerie shadows along the walls. I moved cautiously through the cluttered space, checking the pipes. But then, I heard something above me: footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was walking across the floor upstairs. I froze, my heart pounding. I wasn't imagining it. The footsteps were real, and they were coming from directly above me. I looked up toward the stairs, but there was no one there. The house was empty. Or so I thought. I quickly made my way back upstairs, but when I reached the top, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were moving down the hallway. My breath caught in my throat. The house was empty, yet I could hear someone walking around. That night, as I lay in bed trying to fall asleep, I heard it again, the creaking of the chair. But this time, it wasn't just the chair. I heard something else, something more unsettling. A whisper. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakably real. I could hear it coming from the living room, just beyond the doorway. My mind raced, my heart beating faster. I couldn't move. I just lay there, frozen, listening. The whispering grew louder. It was a low, almost inaudible voice, speaking words I couldn't understand. But it was enough to drive me to the edge of my sanity. I had to know what was going on. I had to face whatever it was. I mustered all the courage I had and slowly got out of bed. My hands shook as I reached for the door. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw an eerie shadow crossing the floor of the living room, the chair rocking furiously now, as if someone or something was sitting in it. The air grew cold, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The rocking chair came to an abrupt halt, and everything went silent. Unable to shake the overwhelming fear that gripped me, I called my best friend, hoping she could talk some sense into me. As I spoke with her, trying to explain what had been happening, I turned my laptop camera toward the yard outside. The moon was full, casting long, eerie shadows over the garden. I wanted to show her how the house felt, how strange it was. And then, I saw it. A figure stood just outside the garden, its shape barely visible in the darkness. It was tall, with long limbs, and it stood motionless. I could barely make out its features, but I could feel its gaze on me, even from a distance. "Do you see that?" I asked, my voice trembling. My friend squinted at the screen. "I don't see anything. It's probably just a tree." I didn't know what to say. I saw it, clear as day. But when I looked back, the figure was gone. Vanished into the shadows. The next night, I knew something had to give. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. The noises, the shadow, the whispering, it was too much. I decided to leave, to pack up and get out of there for good. But as I hurried to gather my things, the house seemed to fight me. The door to the living room slammed shut, trapping me in the hallway. I pulled at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The chair in the living room started creaking again. This time, faster, as if someone was trying to break free from its confines. I felt my chest tighten. The house was alive. Alive with something I couldn't understand. I ran to the front door, desperate to escape, but as I reached it, I saw something in the corner of my eye, a shadow, tall and thick, moving across the hallway. It wasn't just in my imagination. I ran out the door, but not before hearing the final words whispered behind me, "You can never leave." I never returned to that house. Even years later, when I think back on it, the memory still lingers. I thought moving away would make the feeling of being followed go away, but it never did. The whispering, the shadow, the creaking chair, they haunted my dreams, and sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I would see that tall figure standing in the dark. Even now, when I sit in silence, I can hear it, the faint creak of a rocking chair, the sound of someone or something waiting in the shadows. The house may be gone, but its presence still lingers, haunting me forever.